Hello everyone, welcome to a two-part flight from Truckee, California down to Palm Springs. The first part will be cold and dark to taxi, and the second part will be the flight and landing. We are in Truckee, Tahoe, just southwest of Reno International Airport, right on the border of California and Nevada. And we're going to be doing a flight from Truckee down to Palm Springs. More on that in just a minute. I think this is the first video I've done in X-Plane 12. But this is not going to be a demo of X-Plane 12, but it will be featured, of course, in this video. And I will say that I'm very pleased with it. This is 12.1.2, I believe. So we're a couple of generations past 12 itself. One of the exciting things about 12 is it introduced the Citation 10, which is an aircraft from Cessna that was manufactured up until 2012. I think they started in the late 90s. It was a very popular aircraft because of its speed and its service ceiling, which I think is about 51,000. We will not be flying that high today because we have a relatively short flight. This is also not a review of the aircraft itself, but you can see that it's extremely well modeled. And though it's not a steady level aircraft, it's very immersive. The interior looks great, but nothing works. In some pay-war aircraft, you're going to have tables that fold out and bathroom doors that open. These bathroom doors do not, which could be a problem, I suppose. But we're not going to be spending time here. We're going to be in the cockpit, of course. By the way, the airport sounds you hear are coming from XP Realistic, which I really like. Makes you feel like you're there. And let's close up the door. And you'll notice it's a lot quieter. So now that we're in the cockpit, we can take a look around, put aside the yokes. It's very well detailed. Most of the switches do something. In fact, you do have to pay attention in order to get this plane started and flying. One of my favorite features is that it comes with its own FMS. It's not using the X-Plane default FMS, which I don't think anybody's really wild about, but it has its own and it's nicely functional. But before we light things up here, we need to take a look at our route and do a little flight planning. So, as I mentioned, we're going to be flying out of Truckee, Tahoe, down to Palm Springs. Here is our airport diagram for Truckee. We'll be taking off from runway 29 and then find a good SID here, and that is Mogul 2. So here is runway 29. We'll make a right turn, fly over Mogul waypoint, and then make this sweeping 180, which transitions at the Palisades VOR. So let's do a little planning. Our departure is Truckee, Kilo Tango Romeo Kilo, down to Palm Springs, which is Kilo Papa Sierra Papa. 373 miles, nautical miles as the crow flies. Of course, we're not going to be flying as the crow flies because we've got a SID that we're going to be using. So let's pull up that SID again. Mogul 2, I'm using this designation here, and hit the tab key. and you can see the 180 that it has us making. And then we're going to be picking up the Q11 jetway. Pull up our high altitude map. So here is the Palisades VOR. We're going to fly down and pick up this, it's this blue line here. We're going to pick it up at the push, Papa Uniform Sierra Hotel Hotel waypoint. So I'll add that to our route. And then we'll fly that down to Passkey. Next, we want to put in our star. So let's take a look at the available stars. And Sizzler 3 seems to be the one that works best. We transition at Oive and then fly down through Palm Springs. So let's start with our transition, which is Oive. And then our star, which is Sizzler 3. We're going to be using an RNAV RNP approach into 13 right. One of the distinctions of an RNP approach, which is a subset of an RNAV approach, is that there is usually some sort of circling or curve involved. And because of the mountains that surround Palm Springs, we've got almost 11,500 here and a little over 11,000 on this side. There are some lower mountains here, but since we're coming from this direction, there is no way that we could descend quickly enough to get lined up for an approach to 13 right. So we're going to pick up a transition point at Fern, 11,000 feet, and then descend and circle around using these waypoints, and finally get lined up for the runway at the right altitude. So I'm going to copy and paste this to my clipboard for use in SimBrief. In other more sophisticated aircraft, you can get other data from using SimBrief, but for this particular airplane, the best I can get is a fuel requirement. So let's put in our departure. Again, it's Truckee and flying down to Palm Springs. There we go. Our aircraft is a Cessna C-170 or 750. Citation 10. So here's the route that it has given me, and I'm going to paste in our actual route that we plotted over in SkyVector, and it comes up as a valid route. So I'm going to go ahead and generate our flight. And I prefer viewing the PDF. We just have to get this 2,000 kilograms of fuel into the airplane. In fact, why don't we take care of that fuel requirement right now? Let's head back to the airplane and open up our flight configuration, click Customize, and then Weight. So we just need to move our slider for total internal fuel weight down to as close as we can to 2,000. I'd prefer it a little bit more. And then we can just go ahead and apply those changes. So we're ready to light things up. Let's close the door and head over to the cockpit. My checklist comes from watching several YouTube real-life cold and dark startups, also looking at some online checklists, but mainly drawing from Jan's wonderful tutorial videos, official tutorial videos for this airplane that are on YouTube. So that's what we're going to be using today. So let's get started. Passenger oxygen on auto, our emergency lights armed, standby power on, KJAR HSI or emergency HSI, then batteries 1 and 2, generators 1 and 2 on, silence any warnings, ECAS on. And I'm going to pop it open because I want to look at our electrical, make sure we have power. So we've got 24 volts coming off of the battery. Next, we need to check our hydraulics. So pull that little screen up, cycle the auxiliary pump, and we see we have a PSI of just under 2500. They recommend that you cycle the park brake with the auxiliary pump on because we do need hydraulics to keep the plane from moving once the engines are started. Back to the captain's side, the center wing transfer should be in the normal position. Fuel boost is now off. Our FODIC is in the normal position. This is like an autopilot for the engines. Our ignition should be normal. Back to the first officer's side. If it is cold out, we could turn on some windshield heat. Let's turn on our recognition lights. This dims the landing lights in daylight. Turn on our nav lights. I'm not going to turn on our beacon yet. I'm going to wait until we're ready to start our engines. If it were dark, I would turn on the tail flood, do a little advertising. Seatbelt sign can come on. The pressure switches are all in the down position. Then over to our interior master. And now we're ready to fire up our APU. Master switch on. Momentary switch on until we see numbers start to increase. And we want to wait until it gets to 100%. This will show us whether or not we're getting power from the APU once I flip it on. So we're ready. Generator on. You can see that we've got power. I'm not going to turn on the bleed air just yet. They recommend a 2-minute waiting time. I'm not going to wait 2 minutes, but we can run through our rotary test right now. This is checking all of our annunciators. And we'll clear our warnings. Back to our APU, bleed air on. Engine bleed air to LP or low pressure. And then our packs both on. Turn on our yaw damper and our Mach trim, and then our FMS button because we're going to be using the navigation that the FMS provides. Avionics on, and we check to make sure we have an FMS indication here. And now we're ready to program our FMS. We start programming with this button down here, the R4 button, to select our position. We're going to use this bottom one. We'll load that. and then over to our flight plan. The origin is already in there. If it's not, you can always just put it in. We're flying down to Palm Springs. Put that in the destination. And because we're using a SID, which will supply our waypoints, I'm not going to put anything here except for our destination. So I'll put it in the scratch pad and click the L2 button. Click departure next. Runway 29, Mobile SID, transitioning at Palisades, and you get a little summary here before activating. If you remember, we're going to then fly down to the push waypoint, which will allow us to pick up the Q11 airway. And we'll place that right above there. Now it's time to put in our jetway. It's done a little bit differently. So you put in the name of the jetway, and then a period, and then your exit point, which is going to be Passkey. Now it's time to put in our arrival. Click nav, arrival. Our runway is 13 right. Our approach is that RNP Z. We will be transitioning at Verne using the Sizzler 3 star, transitioning at Oive. We get to this little summary, we click activate. Now we have a discontinuity because between Passkey and Oive, we don't have any waypoints selected, and we don't need any because we're going directly from Passkey to Oive. So to delete a discontinuity in this FMS, you put delete in the scratch pad and then click next to the blank. We can check our route, see how we're doing. Let's pop this up and zoom in. And then click this button here that says MFD map. And it will put this little true symbol up in the corner, meaning true north. And then there is a button down here called skip. And we can skip through each of our waypoints. This is also a great way to find any discontinuities that we missed. And finally, here's our RNP approach. So let's put this back so that we have heading up here in the corner, and put this back in place. We're not quite done yet. We click Performance Initialization, and we scroll through the first 3 screens. Now our cruise altitude, 390 for today. On the next screen, we enter our fuel, put it in the scratch pad, click again to fill it out. Click Confirm Init. Scroll through these pages. You're not entering anything there. Next, click the Perf button, then take off. You've got 4 screens showing takeoff data. We'll confirm that, and you have 2 final screens. One is showing your V speeds. Back to our flight plan. The FMS is now programmed. All right, we're ready to start the engines. So our radios are set. I want to open up our display so we can check things as the engines spool up. So, beacon on. That's our middle position here. And the packs come off momentarily. Fuel boost on normal. And then press the engine start key. And we see the turbine come up, and anywhere above 10 you can increase your throttle to idle, which then adds fuel. You can see our hydraulics coming up. We'll see electrical on this side already up. By the way, this aircraft has great sounds. Now we're ready for the second engine. And we can see the turbine come up. And let's increase that to idle. By the way, when you grab these throttles, grab on the very, very outside. Otherwise, it'll grab both of them. And now we wait for those lights to turn off. Clear our warnings. Fuel boost off. Standby power off. Packs back on. We've got electrical on both sides, hydraulics on both sides. So we are good. We are now ready to taxi. So let's start with some flaps. First, the slats. And you can see them rolling down on this side. And we're going with flaps 15. And you can see that indication right here. Taxi light on. Pop this open because we need to put in our altitude. Okay, it was already at 39, which makes me wonder if it is tied to the FMS. That would be lovely. All right, let's dial in our barrel, which is 30.22. Well, this marks the end of the first part of our flight from Truckee to Palm Springs. Tune in to part 2 for the actual flight and landing. Thanks for watching.